So I have to say, this is my first day back at work after I took a few days off after the RNC. I was like, it's been a really busy, crazy few weeks in political news. Like, good time for me to take a breather. And I think I might have missed a little bit of news while I was gone.
Just a tiny bit.
A couple things happened, yeah.
Well, not only was it obviously the Harris thing, but this whole brat green, I feel like I came back 3 days later and I no longer understand anything that's on the internet.
We're all in this together, Martine, and I'm glad that somebody who's younger than me, like you, is also going through this process.
We are aligned in this.
And I think it's also all the elected officials, too, are having their younger staffers sort of translate the memes for them in real time.
Can I get that? Can I have someone whose job is to just explain to me these memes? I feel like that would be very useful to me. Welcome to the Campaign Moment on this Friday, July 26th. I'm Martine Powers, co-host of Post Reports, and folks might be able to hear I am just getting over a cold, so excuse my voice.
And I'm Aaron Blake, senior politics reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. We're also joined this week by Maeve Reston, who's a national political reporter who covers the 2024 presidential race. Hey, Maeve.
How's it going?
Maeve, I know that you have been following Kamala Harris's campaign this week as a pool reporter. I'm just curious, where have you been traveling with the vice president?
So I actually live in California, so I have, covered her for a very, very long time. But this week, I joined her for her first major campaign event, which was in Milwaukee. And it was this fascinating moment to sort of watch the transformation of this political figure in real time. I think that covering the campaign this year, it has just been sort of a story of Democratic despair and this feeling among many voters that sort of losing was just going to be inevitable this year as they were watching Biden struggle on the stage. And what was fascinating in Milwaukee was just that in a moment, it seemed like we had gone from despair to total euphoria.
Yeah, I'm curious to get more of a sense from you of the vibe there and how people are responding to Harris. Aaron, I know we're also going to get some poll numbers that you've analyzed for us to get a better sense of that, too, later in this conversation.
Yeah, we've definitely got some data on this, a few high-quality polls that we're going to go over, some good signs for the Harris ticket. But, we do have a very close race, really a race that looks pretty similar to what it looked like before the June 27th debate. And we're also seeing, I think, some really interesting dynamics on the Republican side where they're trying to figure out what their message is going to be against Harris now that they have a new opponent. Some Republicans are making attacks that are racial in nature. So everybody's dealing with the new reality right now, and we're all figuring it out in real time.
So we're going to get into all of that in today's conversation. But first, I want to start with some news from this week. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visiting D.C. He went to the White House. He met with President Biden. Let's listen to that meeting. Here's Netanyahu.
So from a proud Jewish Zionist to a proud Irish-American Zionist, I want to thank you for 50 years of public service and 50 years of support for the state of Israel. And I look forward to discussing with you today and working with you in the months ahead on the great issues before us.
So this is the first face-to-face meeting between Biden and Netanyahu since Biden visited Israel shortly after the October 7th attacks. And of course, this is coming at a time when Biden says that he's trying to secure a peace deal, especially before he leaves office at the end of his term. Also at this time where Democrat support for Israel has become the sticking point in the campaign. Maeve, what do you make of this visit? And do we have a sense of how Harris might be navigating the Israel question differently from Biden?
Yeah, I think that's been a really fascinating dynamic on the trail over the past year. Particularly the younger generation of voters really felt like Biden only was sort of taking the perspective of Israel. And I think that, Harris has had a much more nuanced sort of way in which that she talks about this issue, she has talked a lot more about this scale of the human suffering that everyone has seen in Gaza. And I think that has endeared her to a younger generation of voters in a way that Biden has really struggled with. And
can I ask, like, what exactly did she say, or how did she strike that balance?
well, she did talk about sort of how hard the Biden administration has been working on getting the hostages freed, but also talked about how the world is really watching Israel and the human suffering that's going on. And she talked about the massive food insecurity and, the kind of conditions that people are living in.
This is a real balancing act in the Democratic Party. This is something that Biden has struggled with for a long time, especially during the college protests in the spring. And so I think at this moment, the Democrats look really united and excited about things. And you have to wonder if once that dies down a little bit, some of these kind of fissures within the party might reemerge. I do think she has a better chance of moving beyond these issues than Biden did because there is some excitement, whereas there was very little excitement for Joe Biden, even among his supporters. But it is a real issue, and there is going to be a time where these issues are going to start to creep in a little bit more, and it's not so much about enthusiasm and excitement.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, how much of the unity will be there, not just in, like, what the stance is on Israel right now, but on how much they're going to talk about it. Is this a scenario where Democrats are kind of agreed that, look, we may not all see eye to eye, but let's just avoid it for the next 3 months? Or is this a situation where there are efforts to, like, highlight Harris having a different stance on this, or maybe not a different stance, but like a more nuanced stance on this than Biden? It's hard to imagine.
And I would say that this is maybe the one issue on which it will be hard to unite. People feel just that strongly about it. And so it's something worth keeping an eye on for sure.
All right, so we're going to keep an eye on that story. We're taping this on Friday morning, and we know that later today, Netanyahu is expected to meet with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. There might be more news from that meeting. But I want to stick with the Harris campaign for a little bit longer. A lot of the push to get her to be the nominee was based around polling. That Biden's polling, that he was performing so poorly in the polls, that this began to be an inevitable question for him. So now the question is, what are the polls showing? And it's been a few days now. Aaron, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so we've got about 4 good quality polls this week, and they do suggest that things have gotten a little bit better for Democrats. In 3 of those 4 polls, Harris actually gained 3 points from where Biden was before. We still have a very close race, though. This is a race that's about even nationally. And I should emphasize, as we've said before, that Democrats probably need to be ahead nationally because of the Electoral College favoring Trump. And what's really stuck out to me is that she has seemed to rally 3 groups in particular: young, Black, and Hispanic voters. These are groups that generally favor Democrats, sometimes by very large margins, but President Biden had been taking less of them than any Democrat in decades. So Harris has gained some ground. I would also say one thing we see in these polls is that Donald Trump is more popular than he's been since he was president. His favorable ratings in 3 of these polls are higher than we've seen in years. This is a real thing where people seem to be giving Trump more of a look after rejecting him in the 2020 election.
Wait, so is what you're saying that, like, both these candidates now are just more popular, that everyone is getting more popular in this last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's kind of been striking. You don't always see that during a campaign. I do think that we are in a moment now where both sides have reason to kind of trend towards their candidate because of the assassination attempt, because of the Republican National Convention. Conventions almost always give you at least a little bit of a bounce. And then Harris's big introduction where, there hasn't been a whole lot of focus on her positions or her previous liabilities. Democrats are
and
just
now she's
mobilized
like a fresh
right now.
new face.
Exactly. Everybody, that's a big thing for Democrats to have something to get excited about. But we have more than 100 days until the election, and there will be a lot of parsing of what these candidates stand for and a lot of back and forth between these campaigns. So I wouldn't necessarily expect Americans to go to the ballot box in November loving their candidates. That seems to be pretty unlikely right now.
And we don't know exactly yet how defined Harris is in the minds of a lot of voters. And I think that's, an argument that Republicans keep making this week. Like, sure, she's having her moment right now. She's out in front of everyone. She's getting all of these younger voters invigorated, but there hasn't been a lot of scrutiny since her presidential campaign about, her past and the positions that she has taken and the fact that she was very liberal in a lot of her votes in the Senate. And so I think she's having sort of a little bit of a honeymoon effect right now. But Republicans certainly expect to see that change in the weeks ahead, and particularly as Trump does what he always does, which is to sort of drill in and try to very effectively define the people that he runs against, especially women.
Yeah, I'm curious, thinking about the time between now and November, what sticks out to you as the moments where the dynamics of this could start to change again? That the honeymoon effect might be over, and that some of the tougher questions that Republicans are pointing out might start to get some traction with voters.
I feel like even though we've had this very crazy, intense couple of weeks of news, that there are a lot of Americans out there who literally are on vacation and traveling around the country. And I don't think that, necessarily people are really drilling down on policy right now. And I've been so struck in some of the states that I cover, particularly Nevada, that people were just completely tuned out of the election. There's a lot of Trump amnesia. There's a lot of people that were just planning to stay home and not be part of this election cycle. And so I think it'll be interesting to see as we get into September. That'll be a different moment in the campaign than the one we are living in right now.
Yeah, and to Maeve's earlier point about some of the positions that Harris took during the 2020 campaign, those are already being featured in ads specifically from Republican Senate candidates. In the 2020 campaign, Harris seemed to understand her lane as being on the left. So she talked about overhauling immigration and customs enforcement. She spoke approvingly of the defund the police movement. Democrats are very united right now, and they kind of the details of the policy disagreements aren't something they try to fight about too much. But in 2020, the party was trying to figure out its way forward, and are we going to go in the Bernie Sanders direction? And Kamala Harris kind of hewed to that approach in certain ways, and that's going to be all over campaign ads. We're going to find out how comfortable Americans are with the kinds of positions she took back then.
Even the plastic straws issue.
Yep.
I think that
Save the turtles, that era where we decided that was the one way to help the planet was to stop using plastic straws.
You see Republicans already, bringing it up that, Kamala is going to make everyone drink out of paper straws. Those things are tiny, but they become part of a larger narrative that, this is this California liberal who is far to the left of where you are, and so you should pay attention. And Harris also struggled a lot with her positioning in that earlier presidential campaign. I think now she is going to stay very much right where, the Biden campaign has been. But it'll be interesting to see how she kind of parses those past statements and why she's changed her mind on those issues.
Okay, so we're going to take a pause there. And then after the break, we will dive into the Kamala memes and why some Republicans are warning against racial attacks on Harris. We'll be right back.
So let's go back to Vice President Harris for a moment. You might have seen social media posts about the campaign or even from her campaign staff using a coconut emoji or TikToks calling Harris brat. Maybe you already knew all of this, but if not, we took a little bit of time to put together a quick tutorial from tech reporter Drew Harwell, who has been tracking the memification of Harris. Let's hear about it.
Okay, so for starters, I'm going to explain the coconut tree meme as it pertains to the Kamala Harris campaign. Is pertains a weird word? I guess people don't use that word, but whatever. So, coconut tree. This dates back to a speech that Kamala Harris gave where she gave this kind of quirky saying where she was recalling something her mother said.
My mother she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
She seems like she's having fun with it. You know, the part about the coconut tree just kind of comes out of nowhere, and then she follows it with this very deep philosophical saying.
You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
That it just goes together and feels really absurd. The coconut tree stuff actually started with a Republican attack account last year. They posted it to sort of, frame her as this, is she drunk? Is she a weirdo? Why is she saying this? But it's become this very endearing meme about her that now people who love Kamala Harris say they're coconut pilled. On TikTok, people who are sharing memes about Kamala Harris are saying they're all part of Project Coconut. Coconut. So it's basically this inside joke that was built out of something to make fun of her that has now become kind of a reflection of how much people like her.
You think you just fell out of a coconut?
So that's the coconut tree meme. And so next we're going to break down a phrase that you've probably seen. Kamala is Brat. English pop star named Charli XCX. She made an album called Brat a couple months ago. It's very popular, especially among Gen Z. It has this really, signature album cover that is that classic chartreuse color with just the word Brat on it. And it's just become just this huge kind of viral thing. After Joe Biden announced he was going to step down, there was this viral video where a guy we've talked to actually named Ryan posted a kind of a remix of the Coconut Tree video with Kamala Harris on top of a Charli XCX song.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
And he called it like a Von Dutch Brat Coconut Tree edit.
In the context.
Von Dutch was the name of the song. And it was just, again, it's absurd. It's kind of ironic. It's just funny and weird. And when that was going viral, Charli XCX posted, Kamala is Brat. And when Charli XCX talks about brat, she doesn't mean bratty, but she's talking about a girl who is, likes to party, is a little bit messy, a little bit vulnerable, but also, very transparent, very honest, says some kooky things, but is all in all a pretty good person. So people have been talking about Brat in that way. And so it just, again, it became this emblem of Kamala Harris's campaign, just showing, this is a woman who was dancing on stage, was getting made fun of, and yet is very much herself. So that all happened organically, this very grassroots kind of user thing. But the Kamala Harris campaign has really leaned into it. They see all of the attention that it's getting, and they're trying to kind of wink at the joke as if they're in on the joke. So the whole Kamala is Brat thing has definitely become something they're trying to activate with people.
Wow. Who knew the layers to this meme? I'm so grateful to our colleague Drew Harwell for his patience in explaining that to noobs like us, I guess.
Drew always does a great job.
It does seem like there's the big question that's screaming to be asked here, though, which is does this matter at all? Who cares if a bunch of influencers are sharing these memes and making weird remixes of this song with, does it actually have any effect on what we will see in this election?
My sense is that it really does matter, in the sense that we're seeing so many younger voters who are not plugged into this campaign at all suddenly paying attention because they're seeing this on their feeds. It creates curiosity. It's stirring discussion about these candidates, about the contrast between Harris and Trump. And so in that way, I think it's a really good hook to bring people in. And so I do think that this will be really important in re-engaging all of those voters.
And they're taking something that was supposed to be a liability for her. Drew mentioned that this began with a Republican attack on her, she's awkward and laughs too much, and what does this even mean that she just said? And they're trying to kind of turn it into a positive, and to the extent that takes hold and people regard these kinds of moments as being endearing, that can matter.
What's really struck me in the last few days is I've seen, I guess, some of these early attack ads that Republicans are putting out about Harris. And so much of it is focused on the laugh, that they sort of insert her laugh in places, or it's clearly used as a point of mocking her, and to suggest that she's unserious. And I question whether that might backfire for Republicans, especially among women, knowing that this is such an easy way to mock women. The other place that we're seeing this come up is some of this language around Harris being a DEI hire or a DEI vice president. And to be clear, this isn't something that we're hearing from all Republicans, but there have been a few Republican members of Congress who are referring to her using DEI, meaning diversity, equity, and inclusion, this kind of corporate language for, trying to introduce more diversity in corporate ranks, but that is now being used as a kind of criticism point for Harris, basically saying that she didn't deserve to be vice president. She's only here because she's a Black and South Asian woman. What is notable here is that we've actually seen House GOP leadership pushing back on this. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, he told Republicans essentially, you need to cut it out. You need to focus on Harris's policy record and her time in the administration, but not go after her identity. So I'm curious what you guys make of this whiplash in the messaging that you're hearing from Republicans so far, and what seems like uneven efforts to figure out how exactly they are supposed to attack Harris.
Yeah, it's pretty stunning to see party leaders, including Speaker Mike Johnson, decide that they need to go public and telling their membership to knock it off. Usually you handle these things behind closed doors and people listen. But the Republican Party today is a very different thing. It's not a top-down party. It is a bottom-up party. And the other thing is that it is a party that has become kind of defined by provocation, at least at the grassroots level. You can't censor me is kind of the prevailing sentiment. And certainly this was the case during Trump's presidency, but I think it really took off over the last 3.5 years, where they will just go there. They will say things that were previously deemed to be out of bounds. And this is an example of that. And I also think it's very much a reflection of Trump. This is a guy whose political career was launched on the birther attack. He's lodged these kinds of theories, not just about Obama, but also about Ted Cruz, Nikki Haley, and even Kamala Harris herself during the 2020 campaign. So the Republican Party has become so defined by owning the libs and provocation and these culture wars. And the DEI thing is very much an extension of that. It's just Republican leaders have shown they've allowed this stuff to build within their base. And so policing it now that they really need to hone their message is a very difficult thing to do.
And I think that the real question now is where Donald Trump goes with this. His spokesman this week kind of left the question open. He said basically well, we haven't made those attacks. And someone asked him whether they were off limits. And he said, basically, I don't know yet, but that's not something that we've done. And I was actually on Capitol Hill earlier this week with a lot of female Democratic lawmakers who wanted to kind of come together and all show their support for Kamala Harris. And it was really interesting to watch, their responses to all of that, to really push back and say, we're not going to let that stand. This is an incredibly accomplished woman who was, Attorney General of California. She was a courtroom prosecutor. She's a senator, and she's been the vice president over the last couple of years. And I spoke to Maxine Waters, the congresswoman from California, who said, we're going to stand in front of Kamala Harris, not literally, but figuratively, and we will push back on all of these attacks. And so I think that Trump was really making some inroads with voters of color, particularly Black men. I think Republicans do know that this is risky ground if they go in that direction, and something that could have an unwanted effect for them. But, a lot of times these members really take their cues from Trump. And so we'll see the way in which he attacks her, the way in which J.D. Vance attacks her. And I think that will really determine the direction this campaign goes.
Yeah, and that Maeve mentioned Vance. A clip has been circulating of Vance saying in 2021 that Kamala Harris is a, quote, childless cat lady. And this is something that Democrats really believe is a big deal. Attacking her in those terms. J.D. Vance
there are a lot of cat ladies out there, and I feel like it's, as you point out, a risky move to alienate all of them. And there are many Republican cat ladies, too. Let's be real.
I think it was Minnesota Governor Tim Walz who said, just go on the internet and see how it turns out for people who attack cat people. See how that turns out for you. And I think there's some truth in that. J.D. Vance, when he made these comments, was gearing up for a Republican primary for Senate. And the name of the game in those kinds of campaigns is to provoke and to, kind of divide.
Be as bombastic as possible.
Yeah, exactly. That was the approach, and that's been the approach, especially in Republican primaries. But it has become so kind of ingrained in the conservative influencer sphere and these Republican primaries that it's hard to kick that when you get to the general election. People are like, well, this is what our movement is about, isn't it? And then suddenly you're in a general election where maybe that kind of thing doesn't pan out as well. And it's hard to tell them to knock it off at this point.
And it's also kind of been an interesting window into how much this campaign has changed, in the sense that you look back on Donald Trump's decision to choose J.D. Vance, this provocateur on the right. He was making that decision in the context of running against Biden. And it was a total base play to choose Vance, who was going to get out there and really energize, the MAGA movement even more in a lot of those key swing states. And now it's a totally different campaign.
Interesting. Well, I'll be curious to see how that plays out in the coming weeks and months. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you guys so much for being here. Maeve, thank you.
It's so fun to join y'all.
And Aaron, I will see you next week.
Thank you. And don't forget to subscribe to the Campaign Moment newsletter in our show notes and at postreports.com.
Maeve Reston is a national political reporter covering the 2024 presidential race for the Post. And, as we all know, Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter.
If you're tuning in via Post Reports, you will be able to keep listening to the Campaign Moment on most Fridays. But we also have a ton of exclusive content that you'll only be able to hear on the Campaign Moment show feed itself. We had a great episode this week where we were running through the various candidates for Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick. So if you don't want to miss that analysis, I highly suggest that you subscribe to the Campaign Moment wherever you listen. Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and mixed by Rennie Svirnovskiy. It was edited by Lucy Perkins and Mary Jo Murphy.
Our team also includes Maggie Penman, Rena Flores, Lucy Perkins, Monica Campbell, Ted Muldoon, Alana Gordon, Ariel Plotnick, Bishop Sand, Sabby Robinson, Emma Talkoff, Sean Carter, Peter Bresnan, Ali Bianco, Trinity Webster-Bass, Allison Michaels, Renita Jablonski, and Elahe Azadi. I'm Martine Powers.
And I'm Aaron Blake. Have a great weekend.
See you soon. I will say my one saving grace in all of this is that I actually do know who Charlie, I don't know if it's CXC or XCX.
Wow. Wow.
She was on the Barbie soundtrack. I run to that song, so.
What's the song that you run to?
It's like the song where they are like getting in the car and speeding away from the bad people from Mattel in the movie.
I haven't seen the movie, so.
Well, you got to see the movie.
Do I have to?
It's a good like chase scene, and it's a good chase scene song. And when I run, I want to feel chased. So, so it all works. I'm a big fan.
I just imagine Martine like running for her life as she gets a workout, like looking behind her and seeing nobody actually running behind her, but imagining that there is.
Truly the only motivator for me to run.